Hey everyone, we've got another Total Podcast Idiots podcast installment here today. FurySK, this time joined by special guest Holocron. How are you doing, sir?
Hey, not too bad. How about yourself?
We're doing great. This installment, I think we're going to focus just a little bit more on getting teams and pulling them out of Division 6 or Division 3 basketball and getting yourselves into the top flight, whether that be in 4, 3, 2, or 1 in hardwood. And since both of us have had a couple of teams now that we pulled out of here, we're going to take some of the more recent teams that we've had control of, since they're the, I guess, most recent, and kind of talk through how exactly we've managed to get to where we are with them currently. My team being Ashland, as I just posted a couple days ago, and yours being Colorado.
Correct.
So why did you take Colorado? Let's kind of get that out of the way.
So ended up taking Colorado because of another game I played with another Fury 508. Asked to do basically, I think, a Big Ten setup, if I'm correct. So Colorado was open, ended up snagging them, but did not realize like how deep of a hole I was about to try to take myself out of this, dig myself out of this hole with Colorado. I believe I took it over from, I think it's Braden on Discord. Colorado was pretty well set up with 4 stars and 5 stars, but they were redshirted, so it impacted recruiting a lot.
Yeah, I believe, if memory serves, it started more with. Oh, it's going to show me Ashland, but I believe it was Coach Wannabe or CWB was the first person that I recall kind of having a long history with the Colorado team. Uh, yeah, it was Coach Wannabe first, and then Bad Manners, which I believe was Braden's alternate account, I believe.
Yeah, it was.
It's kind of interesting because I think Coach Wannabe actually got him into decent enough shape, but wasn't really able to push them over the edge before he got busy. And then Braden managed to pretty much pull them from there all the way up towards the top flight before falling back down because he also has run out of time to really do a whole lot of management. So I think he's down to just Houston again. So when you took over, it looks like they had just fallen out of uh, Conference 3-2 back down to 4.
I mean, uh, took them over on the off season, so they had just demoted to 4. Was able to hang in at 4 because I still had 4 stars and 5 stars readily available on the team. After they graduated, it was just a massive plummet since then.
So which class was your first recruiting class?
Should have been the very first off season I took them over. So
So players that have cycled through already are currently still on the team.
all the players that are on the team right now are my recruiting class. I don't believe there's anything left over of what he had.
So you started with, looks like, Donati and Flynn.
Donati Flynn, I took over, or I recruited Kirby Curry as well. So everybody that's on here, all done by me.
And so what was kind of your game plan when you started recruiting in these players? Were you looking for anything in particular?
So originally I was gonna build same way I did Cal State Dominguez Hills, where it was a glass cannon offense that could just drag me out and worry about defense later. I was planning on getting those guys set and then start building a pipeline. The issue was is in state for Colorado, it was taking me about 21 contacts to get any interest because of how many 4 and 5 stars were redshirted. So I had to start bargain bin hunting. Hence where Kirby Curry comes in. And if you look at him, I believe I pulled him in at like 60 SI, 67 SI to become a player that had to play 20 minutes for me. And
Yep.
it took him a while to commit to me as well, even though he had no offers.
Yeah, it looks like he started his high school senior season at 57 SI and got out of it at 67. So 60 would make sense if you recruit him somewhere in the midst of that season.
And then after I got him, I still had some of Braden's leftover players to keep me afloat. And I started looking for pieces that I could fill in that were tall enough. Wanted to try that big man route where everybody's usually 6'9" and above, small forward, power forward, center. Got a couple of those guys, but once again, could not get any of the top or even the middle tier guys because it took so many contacts to get any interest. So dropped in a couple contacts here and there. A couple of the guys I was able to secure for around 50 contacts. As you can tell, they're not the greatest. So I'm just hoping I can last until the next my next set of recruits come in. So really banking on Jack Stein, uh, Hugo, DuPont. Who else I have coming through? I believe I'm in on one guy this year with Colorado. I believe that's the only guy I plan on going after for the time being.
It looks like he
And
got a
then
lead.
hoping it stays that way because there's quite a bit of contacts invested into him. And then trying to build that pipeline afterwards. Don't think I'll be able to pull that 5-star next year. More than likely going to demote this year, if not just float. And yeah, looking at the contacts I have in Doug Connolly, don't think I'll be able to catch up to, I believe who's the other team? Utah State. Yeah, Utah has that in-state advantage, and I still have that penalty.
Yeah, it's a bit early to kind of tell where you stand in the conference just from a strength perspective because everybody kind of runs different schedules here. I guess we could take a quick look at the rankings and see if we can't pull the TPI numbers for you. But I kind of like the example that we pulled up of the single star recruit that you pulled in. It kind of personifies the idea that we don't need to necessarily have these 4 or 5 star guys, and in fact, if you redshirt those guys, it kind of hurts you in the long run. So having those guys finally cycle through, maybe now you can have to spend less and get more out of them. Let's see. Higher ranking. And got fight TPI already. I want to say you were down in 7. Yep. So just looking at where you stand in that conference, looks like it's actually reasonably competitive because there's a lot of teams that are floating top 100 in terms of their TPI, but in reality, the bottom 7 teams are. I guess anybody near you is within maybe 3, 4. Yeah, I think it looks like 4 is the distance you would have to cover as far as TPI difference to get to a position where you're not in demotion. So it's not like a wide TPI gap where you can't get out. It's just can you outcoach some of the guys up there? So at least a reasonable shot that you can stay up.
Yeah, I'm just hoping my head coach really good at developing, so hoping with enough minutes played, I can get my guys to start jumping.
And was this a coach that you just kind of found out there, or was it somebody that you picked up as an assistant and kind of brought in? Looks like
Uh,
you found.
Found them.
Yeah, looks like a pretty solid one, at least as far as the right side goes, and the left side's not really as important early on, I would say. It's something that you kind of like to have once you get up at the top and have to get every point. I guess every point probably matters a little bit more once you're in, say, Division 1 top flight. So I think the other big difference between myself and you is the whole redshirt policy. Is that just because you didn't have a lot of talent to start with, or is your policy not to redshirt everybody and just kind of pick and choose the guys you think need the extra time?
So I'm all for redshirting, but I realized that there was no recruiting class coming in, and I had to play people. There was like no ifs, ands, or buts about it, and I wanted to not continuously fall all the way to LL6. So some of these guys, as you can see, not redshirted, really didn't have a choice. I needed a bench. Uh, as you can tell, the newer freshmen are redshirted. The two incoming, Dave Bateman and Jack Stein, will also be redshirted, just so that way I have that consistency with actual talent this time.
Yeah, it's a reasonable call to make when you don't have anybody because I think the big issue with uh, the big decision for me as far as red shirts go is, am I going to get enough playing time? Am I going to get 20 plus minutes of playing time either as a starter or kind of one of those overlapping bench guys that can play 3 or 4 positions for you? Because if it's not there, then obviously a red shirt can pay off because you get that extra year. But if you can get them out there and starting, you get the 20, 25 jump instead of getting your 15 as a red shirt. And then they're helpful still. It's just you've lost that one little extra year of recruiting time. That's the only downside to it at all. So perfectly understandable that you would go ahead and just have to start some guys, especially guys like Kirby that were probably one of the only bigs that you had going early on.
Yeah, I believe that's why I needed to play him 20 minutes, is I had no big depth during that time frame. I think I had a Guillermo Cordero who was recently drafted at the number 2 pick, but after that there was nothing left in the stable. So I needed Kirby, Jennings, Gall, and of course DuPont now to fill those shoes.
Yeah, you can see the jump with Kirby though. You got him 20 minutes even as a backup, and he went from a 67 to an 88, and then you got him a couple more starts and roughly an extra minute a game, and it looks like he jumped a full 24 that time, followed by another 20. Looks like he's not jumping this much as a senior, but I kind of see that happen a lot with these players. Is if you give them a lot of minutes and give them a lot of development time, there seems to be some sort of soft cap built into where you can't quite get as much mileage at the end there.
Oh yeah, I believe with Biomon, before I think Blockman picked him up, I had a point guard that started for me, and I believe he ended up getting like 32 or 36 SI in a single season his freshman year. And then I believe, of course, he slowed down after that, roughly in the 10 to 15 range.
Yeah, yeah. My story is a pretty similar one as far as what happened to me early on. I think when I got control of Ashland, they were already in six, so I really didn't have anywhere to go but down or go up. Excuse me. Nowhere. They couldn't go any further down. I was literally pulling them in at a 2-28 conference record, so I didn't even have to worry about really covering the bench. I could do whatever I wanted with that team in 2017. But I was also dealing with a situation where I could not, I didn't have anybody to start. So if I look back and analyze that 2017 roster, I think it's all guys that were just fringe players at best. Yeah, guys that were literally just putting up plus minus differentials as a group in the negative double digits across the board, and just a bunch of guys that really didn't have any upside. So, like 1 star recruits that were walk ons for the most part, and 10 potentials, a couple of 11s. And I think my goal was much the same as yours. I needed to get that roster to the point where I was recruiting out instead of recruiting like everybody the moment I got a senior class uh, recruited and taken care of. I wasn't given enough time to go out and look at juniors. It was already time for the turnover and here I was again recruiting seniors. So
It was Colorado when I ended up picking them up. I believe I had like available 8 or 9 scholarships, but I made sure I didn't use them all because I've noticed like a lot of new users that pick up some of the lower level teams. I believe one specifically just recruited I think like 10 or 11 people all at once. So you can redshirt half of them, but you just leave a massive gap in between. Like you're not setting yourself up for success in the long run. That's what I didn't want to do with Colorado. I knew it was going to be. I had to play the long game, no matter what.
yep, and I think that user was on the forums recently. It can still work out for him. I mean, if you redshirt half and don't redshirt half, then essentially you've got two classes of say 5 or 6 recruits that you can bring in. And if he realizes kind of the pain and suffering behind having to recruit such a huge class, there's probably no doubt in my mind that he's going to just go ahead and fill 3 or 4 that first season, then 3 or 4 the second season, 3 or 4 the third, once he kind of gets around to that window of recruiting again. So it's a mistake that does happen more often than you would really believe if you were kind of in this game for the last 10 to 15 seasons. I think I was in a similar situation with Ashland. I think they had something like 7, 8, or 9 open scholarships. So I went and tried to pick kind of the best 4 or 5 guys I saw out there as opposed to trying to fill them all. So my first class is now all in the seniors boat with Scotty Marshall, I think, was one of the guys I looked at. And my goal was just to get down there and look for guys that were underappreciated but still talented. And this guy wasn't too far down in terms of his skill index. As you can see, he was a 88 SI to start his high school senior year, and then he turned into a 99 when I got him in. And I started him as a freshman, decided to redshirt him as a sophomore because, like you said with your team, not a whole lot of guys out there to really play when you're recruiting for 8 or 9 scholarships. So I got Marshall. I think it was 2 contacts for him. And I've gotten a little bit lucky because his skill index has exceeded his potential, which doesn't always happen. I think I got Logan Kennedy was the 3-star I got. I got him for a single contact. And I think the reason why I got him for a single is, if you note, he has the 89 start value for his redshirt season. And he jumped quite a bit as a redshirt. I got lucky there again. So a lot of this has some luck component to it. But I think normally, I don't know about you, but I see like a 12 to 15 jump from my redshirts when I redshirt them.
Yeah, that's what I roughly see. That's why I prioritize a coach that would do well for me recruiting as well as developing. Offense, defense, all that stuff like that can come in later. If, in my opinion, if I have the talent, I should be able to smash most of the lower level opponents. I just need to make sure that they have those SI gains to begin with.
Yeah. Espinoza was the third guy I went after, more of a cross between a small forward and a power forward, but he's played more as a big because I've lacked the depth for the most part there. But again, just a single contact burn there. I was really trying to save them. Where I didn't save them is where I had to compete for one of the players who is kind of the subject of controversy. And I've already apologized to Fuzzy Banana in DMs, but again, publicly, sorry for all the drama that came of this player back in the day. But this is probably the only guy that I spent a lot of contacts trying to get in. And for me, I almost kind of regret it because of the way that I've seen him develop. He's not necessarily developed as fast as some of the other guys that I brought in. And then the final guy, I think, was Wharton, wherever he is. He's up here. And Wharton, I think, was another one I had to start as a freshman. But again, I was keen on getting anybody I could get the minutes, and anybody that I couldn't get starting minutes, I just redshirt and kind of went with walk-ons and whatever scraps were left, and then redshirt everybody that didn't get redshirt as a freshman as a sophomore. So kind of had 2 classes going of like 5 and 3 recruits, those first 2, and kind of balanced them out like that. But regardless, I think we both kind of had the long road to get the team turned around. I think yours took a few seasons to get to the point where you were kind of happy with where they were.
I'm still roughly working on that, hoping that of course, the classes that I've recruited are starting to blossom enough to keep me afloat until the next set are ready to go. Hoping not to tank any further than LL5.
Yeah. Yeah, I think my focus was less on the offense and more on trying to get a team that was really solid defensively. So instead of trying to outscore somebody like 100 to 90, I was trying to figure out ways to keep my opponents from getting anywhere north of 60 points per game by slowing the offense and such on my side of the ball way down so that my possessions took longer and thus they wouldn't get possessions either. And it worked out real well last year, but we're kind of off to a rocky start in uh, the. I think I'm in like 4-6 now. Yeah. So just sporting the 3-3 record, but I kind of talked a big game and scheduled up and all the fun times that come from that as far as getting the ranked opponents and getting my rear end handed to me as a result.
Definitely. I believe I have a rivalry game with Fury 508. Yeah, he took over Oklahoma. So I ended up playing them as one of the only ranked teams on my schedule. And it was surprisingly close to what I expected. I thought it was going to be like 20, 25 point blowout in his favor. Managed to keep it close, and I'm seeing, I guess, that game plan, especially with Jennings, Kirby, and Gall just carrying the load for this team. As you can tell, my guards aren't the greatest, and I really do not have a deep enough bench where I can rely on some type of scoring.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. It looks like you still have enough defense to get by there, so I think it's definitely possible for you to win some games here, especially once you get into conference play and get away from some of the stronger non-conference opponents that kind of beat you up. It look
Yeah,
like.
most of those that I've scouted tend to have smaller big men, or they're super light and weight wise. So easier to bully them and just, game plan for like an inside attack. Whereas once you get up into D1, most people know the ins and outs of making sure that they have either a tall enough center or power forward, have some weight on them, and usually tend to have some speed with some wingspan. It's a lot harder to just bully people.
Yeah, just kind of looking at your conference schedule, I kind of recognize at least a handful of the opponents you have. The one that sticks out being Labar. Pretty sure he has a pretty good team going right now. Yeah, so you definitely got a couple teams that uh, I can recognize and say that they've probably got their team in pretty good shape at the moment. But for every person that I do recognize, you still have a couple out there that are kind of new names. So we'll see if they can put something together. So, are there any prospects that, whether it be for this team or your primary team that you've recruited, that haven't worked out for you, and have you learned anything from those failed experiments?
Oh, definitely. I believe I went after on Cal State Dominguez Hills, a player named Aaron Stokes. He was supposed to be, bona fide like scoring threat off the bench. Never panned out to one. SI growth was horrendous. Two, did not do particularly well. So kind of learned from there as well as what I'm looking for. Because at that time I was still rather new, didn't understand not just SI but where all the points need to be at, as well as intangibles. As for so far with Colorado, still filling it out, but I've noticed I kind of dug myself in a hole with my two guard setup with Flynn and Sharp. Both are really injury prone. I've been running a lot of like small forwards at my point guard spot, stuff like that. Find where Stokes is at. He did not get much playing time. There it is.
That's probably a couple years back. Let's take a look.
I believe 2 years back.
It's gone too far back now.
Yeah, 2020 was the last time he.
I see him down there now. Let's take a look at him.
As you see in 4 seasons, he went a whopping 25 SI.
Yeah, but it also looks like he didn't get a whole lot of minutes at any point in time. Looks like he got the playing time as a true freshman about 7 minutes. It looks like he didn't gain a whole lot of experience from that 7 minutes per game.
Hoping roughly like I believe I used his freshman year just because I needed someone to play
Yeah.
to see if he was worth redshirting. Because I don't think his high school development showed to be too great either. So I didn't want to waste a red shirt on him. Yeah, so roughly about a 10 a 10 average SI every year.
Yeah, it looks like he barely qualified as the 3 star or the kind of guy that is just short of redshirt penalty. It's kind of the sweet spot for a lot of people to recruit because it's you don't get redshirt penalty, and you can still find guys that are getting to the point where they might be a 4 star in terms of their skills, but just either started too low or didn't develop fast enough over their high school careers to get there. And it definitely looks like for Stokes, it was going the opposite direction. He was at the very top at almost 70 as a high school freshman. That's very close to what can usually push a 4 star, even on an 11 potential. But then, as you noted, he only gained an average of 10 from there on. So he went from being at the cusp of a 4 star to being more or less a mid to low level 3 star, and then never really materialized as a college player, whether it be because he didn't get enough minutes to get development or because his development rate, for whatever reason, was at a lower clip than some of the other players on your team.
Yeah, once I realized his freshman year was only, I believe, an 8 SI gain, uh, everybody else that was recruited during his draft class surpassed him talent wise. So then he got buried even further down the depth charts where he was just a utility guy, more of a plug and play player. Anytime I needed a power forward, a small forward, or if I was in a jam because he had that 7 foot wingspan, 235 pounds, he could sometimes play center for me.
Yeah, and I'm not sure exactly where this team has been recently as far as 2017. Yeah, I can actually see it. It's right here. It's 3. So you're basically in Division 1 where the 6'7", 6'7.5" is starting to get a little bit too small, but the wingspan, the vertical, as you noted, are within reason to be able to be competitive with other players in Division 1. But this player, I think, is almost one of those where if you had, say, recruited him this year for Colorado, who's now in Division 2, or I think it's Conference 5.7, I think is where I saw you.
Yeah.
Uh, this kind of player, I think, would almost be kind of like the ideal target if I was there, just because I wouldn't have to spend maybe the amount of points that I would have to spend on someone that's more of a 6'9" or 6'10" height, or at least projected that way. So it's all about finding a guy and kind of saying, well, didn't work for this team, but could it have worked if I was in a different position? And I think that's what a lot of us struggle with as we're trying to get up the ladder is, these are the players that work for us if we're in Conference 2.1, but uh, it takes so many points to get these guys that we start running out of contacts to put on players and out in like our sophomore or junior classes that we're recruiting in. And then, for example, this guy is, well, didn't quite work for me in 3, but maybe it would have worked for me in 5. So it's one of those
Yeah.
situations, I guess I'm trying to say. Each player kind of has their own ability to be useful in specific situations. It's just trying to find out whether this player can be useful in your specific situation or not. And I think if we went to recruiting news immediately here and just kind of looked, what stood out to me today is a lot of players that are on the bottom of this list are all those kind of big or power forwards slash center height players, whether they are currently or they will be as they grow another couple of inches between now and when they start for those teams. It just goes to show that people aren't really looking for huge SI numbers when they're recruiting bigs. They're just trying to find anybody before they all kind of get snatched up by other teams because you can't really teach a player height. All you can do is give them time to grow their other skill sets out.
Yeah, getting the bigs out of the way early helps so much because then you can pick basically like your guards, your small forward, stuff like that. Whereas if you're in a battle with some of like the top tier big men, and who knows how many teams are on that guy, and you lose out on them, and now most of your backup plans are already gone. You're kind of settling for the bottom of the barrel picks who may not even get a red shirt and struggles to play all 4 seasons until you can find that next guy, hopefully the following season.
Yeah, like just looking at the bottom guy recruited from today's recruiting news is Darnell Owen, and yeah, he's only got like a 70 skill index, and yeah, he's only got 10 potential, but his height and his wingspan specifically are like at the very, very top of what you can probably find. I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't see a whole lot of wingspans north of 7.5 foot, and this guy is already at a 7'8" wingspan, and he's got the huge rebounding potential. So even if he's at a 70 skill index now, maybe up throw the red shirt on this guy and he gets to like 90 within his red shirt plus what's development time we have left. Or I think we're on like day 8 or 9 right now. So that's
I
like another.
think uh, I think the closest guy I can compare him to, especially intangible wise, would be Angel Reyes from uh what is it, Dominican? That guy is an absolute monster. 10 potential as well, I believe. I'm not sure if he's gonna live up to Angel Reyes type height, but definitely possibly worthy of looking at a red shirt, like you said. See if he get can get anywhere between 90 SI the start of his freshman year or his redshirt freshman year, and see if this guy can be that cornerstone piece in the middle.
Yeah, I used to have Crown as kind of my play around with team, and I didn't have quite the wingspan, but I had a guy with just huge, huge weight as well as his height, and he ended up. I'm not sure that he ended up being like the greatest player, but I think he got to 20 strength pretty much as a junior or really close to that. But I didn't have control of the team at that point. I let them go. So let's see. Yeah, he ended up getting into the 150s as far as his skill index goes. So probably was a pretty decent big for Crown there at the end. He got the conference player of the year in the all conference center. So good examples of guys that weren't exactly the most thrilling in terms of all of their attributes. Like in his case, he wasn't a great rebounder and he really wasn't that good defensively, but man, he was real strong and he had a good inside shot. So he didn't get all of the eyes and all the attention when he was getting recruited, but he certainly was somebody that they used heavily on the Crown team there. So I think for me, what I have kind of preached when I talk to people about who and where they should be recruiting is kind of picking up like one of the big three attributes for their position. So, what I guess I mean by that is I kind of classify a prospect out based on their position, and then I have three attributes I look for. So, like in a point guard, it's usually something like perimeter defense, then IQ, then passing. I want those three attributes. And then if I go to shooting guard, I'm looking for like the outside shooting plus range, preferably. And then I'm looking for defense still because I consider defense to always be a big number. And then I look mostly at either finishing or driving just because I know that those two mechanics kind of play in. And then small forward, it's usually double down on both defensive attributes. And then I want either inside shooting or passing as that third attribute. I don't really care which one it is, but I want one or the other. Somebody that can either help my team flow or can handle the ball and then just take a quality shot. For power forward and center, it's kind of the same setup. It's literally inside shot, rebounding, inside defense. 1, 2, 3. And I kind of look for having at least two of those three attributes at all of those positions when I recruit. Do you have kind of a similar setup where you have like two or three attributes at each position, or what is your kind of game plan when it comes to looking out amongst all the hundreds and thousands of players that get generated and finding players that you think will work for you?
So Colorado, it's hard to explain for them just because I'm just looking at the bottom of the barrel. But if we were to go to like CSCH, Cal State Dominion Hills, for them, I tend to look for not only SI growth, but then positive comments. So I don't know if anybody's ever taken a look at my team, but it's very hard to find negative comments on any of my players. And I usually look for, like you said, those defensive comments. It's helped uh, to this point. The only bad thing is, like you guys said, with big men. Big men are pretty hard to find, especially in California where there's a million managers going after all the good ones. So some of my big men are underweight. Some of them don't have the biggest wingspan. But like you said, for my point guard, I'm looking for someone who's got solid IQ. Anything north of 10 is usually where I look for a point guard. And then I look at comments, see how they produce. So for Riley Hall, unfortunately, I had to take him from NAF. I did have this guy on my watch list, but this guy is completely balled out for me. For shooting guard, I've almost always exclusively looked for someone with that excellent shooter comment. Like you said, for a small forward, I'm looking for either all around or great defender. And like you said, either inside shot or outside shot. I need one of the two. But I believe Steve did say that you can no longer put the big eye on three players. So I may start floating more towards that outside shot with a little bit of like average inside shooting, and then big men, power forward. Every power forward I have has to have inside shot and outside shot just to hopefully stretch the field, which has worked for Monk's case this whole time. And then center, just a big body that can hopefully grab me rebounds, cover the paint, and if he can score, he can score. But I'm hoping that my 1 through 4 have enough firepower to just cover for my center.
Yeah, I think specifically how Steve has it working. Well, how he had it working after beta, I think, was uh, mostly a preventative measure at that point to prevent people from playing like 6'8" guys at point guard and having them just be ridiculously talented because there is no real dribbling issue for the tall guys at point guard in hardwood. So I guess in real life you would say that someone that's a kind of a smaller guy, like not like 5'5", but say like 6 foot would have a shorter dribble than a guy that's 7 foot, just because he's a taller guy. That doesn't exist in hardwood, so in order to kind of punish people from, or persuade them, I guess is a better word, from stacking height everywhere, he made it so like putting an eye on a point guard, a big eye, would just take the point guard and move them in a couple of feet as opposed to pushing them all the way to the basket. And I think what he's done now is he's done that same thing almost for a small forward, to where you can use the eye, but it won't put them literally at the basket. It will put them 5, 6, 7, 8 feet away from the basket, so you still only have those two guys that can be right on top of it. So it should be interesting to see if that kind of means that you can't put like a small forward in a center at the basket and pull the power forward out. I don't know if that's something that can be done yet. We would have to probably play around with that, or maybe someone's already done some analysis on it. But uh, that would be something that I hope we haven't lost in the shuffle here, is the ability to kind of mix and match who goes into the paint and who stays just outside of the paint, but is still playing kind of more inside for their position than perhaps you would be used to seeing if you watch pro basketball in real life.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. I was planning on toying with Colorado. The only issue is I don't really have a power forward that can sit outside. I do have a center that can move outside, so I was thinking about maybe small forward and my power forward staying inside, and then moving my center outside and see how that works. If I can take advantage of mismatches, 'cause there's not many centers that are going to be able to defend another center that has 11, 12 plus outside shooting.
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't know enough about the strategy when it comes to hardwood, even though I've played since I think 2006 as far as the seasons go, and I think we're in 22 now, which is like the exact opposite of the way I was in other sim games. Like I was known more for being more tactically sound in, say, like buzzer beater back in the day than I was with knowing exactly how to get the most mileage out of a prospect and how to develop them properly. So it's kind of weird that we've gone from one extreme for me to the other extreme. But I'm kind of looking at Colorado here as far as the state goes in the senior class, and it looks like a lot of decent players are sitting down on the very low end of the spectrum still for people to recruit, at least. So, is it something that you would even consider going way, way down on the SI if they started low? Like, I
Oh,
already.
definitely. I have like what I end up doing, especially with Colorado, is I will open up, say, prospect search, and I will open it up to all locations, and I will start from the highest SI who has no teams interested, and work my way down and see, are they worth it? Can they fill what I need? And then if I can't find anything, then I work into Colorado, and I'll move down the list and see, do they fit the need? Am I going to be able to get them playing time? Have they developed well since their freshman, sophomore, junior year? Or am I going to be basically wasting a scholarship just for a body?
Yeah, I think what happens to a lot of people, including me, is sometimes I don't even look enough at some of the 9 and 10 potentials when I'm developing out kind of a younger team that's just trying to recruit in some basic talent and let them play their way into a good enough shape to help me out. I think that's common error or misstep for some of the younger managers. And for me, back in the day when I was just starting out, I did the exact same thing. I said, "Oh, this guy only has 10 potential, so he clearly can't play." Well, he can. He just can't play and be your star player if you're in basically League One. You have great player for League Five or League Six, but League One not so much.
Yeah, and then seeing the way Steve has done it so far, especially with Monterey, is showing that you can get all the way to the top with a two-star team, it may not last long, as you saw this past season, but you can find gems down there, usually uncontested, and you can usually build a solid, complementary players around, one or two star guys, and then start pipelining, say your junior, sophomore class, and invest on those higher end three and fours. Fives are usually a little bit harder to get, of course, when you're LL6, LL5. Some people have pulled it off, but then most of the time they spent over three-digit contacts and then don't have a supporting cast for them.
Yeah, not sure that it's really easy for anybody to do what Steve did with Cal State Monterey Bay either, because I'm not going to say that he has hidden information on these players that he recruited that we don't, but whenever you kind of build out a game engine, I have to think that you kind of know what may or may not work within it. So
Yeah.
it's going to be a struggle for anybody to reproduce what he did, but I think it's definitely possible for you to go out there and recruit basically a team of all 10, 11 potential guys that are all two stars and get them to the point where they can play and be huge parts of your championship run. But definitely looks like he fell basically that one star player short of being able to really be that staying power in that top flight. But to even get there, whether or not you have any pre-existing knowledge of a game engine is still remarkable. I think I would be lucky to just get into like League 3, maybe. Because there's still enough teams there where maybe I can weasel my way in a kind of weaker Conference 4 team or
I
Conference
know a lot
4
of
setup.
I know a lot of players tend to just only look in state or in region, but if you go hit up, say, Florida, Texas, California, I think even Canada has some really nice players, and you go further down the list into that two-star area where they're not as highly recruited, you can find some really good gems. And as we've seen in the Discord, people will post those gems at the end of the season, yet they kind of annoy some of the people, but it helps others, and they end up getting the uh, who was it? I forgot what user it was, but they ended up selecting either a one or two star, and now they're the focal point of their team. I think they're up to LL4 now currently. So you don't necessarily always have to stay within a state or region. Doesn't hurt to look outside, scroll down the list, find those two stars, and then dump a couple points. I've also noticed some people tend to stay away from may not uh, may not qualify, as well as the whole academics. Sometimes I'll just throw a point in there and just hope for the best. And sometimes you can come away with players that are well over 100 SI, 11, 12 pots and above, and you basically have yourself a steal. And some of those can become, I guess, cornerstone players for your team. I think that's what I did with Dave Bateman for Colorado. I went down that list, like you said, found him two stars. I think I invested like one contact into him, and I feel definitely worth it.
Yeah, I think if you were to eliminate Mamadovi from my team that I had going with Ashland, you put in the next best option, which I guess would be probably Jeffrey Norton would be the next best option for a big. You could basically put my starting five down to about a 30 contact team at that point because not. I basically went for the guys that were kind of fringe for their potential. And yes, I know I have a 13 potential 4 star in the equation, but even he wasn't that highly recruited because he didn't have the greatest of outside shots. So he didn't really have the ability to be a good shooting guard. So you had an oversized point guard, basically. And I think he's now positioned more as a small forward. But again, there's a lot of value to be had on some of these 10 and 11 potential guys that are 2 stars out there. So it definitely helps people to go searching down further down the list than perhaps they were anticipating. To your point about academics and troubled kids, I think Trouble Kids is kind of the big talking point, at least amongst the Discord, and occasionally pops up on the forums. Uh, a lot of people have gotten frustrated at given points in times when they recruit a guy for 2 or 3 seasons, and then they get to that senior year and suddenly there it is, because that is kind of the, I want to say it feels almost like a 30 or 40% chance for that to turn into a situation where that player doesn't go to JUCO, doesn't commit to your team, he just poofs. And for a lot of people, it really feels awful to invest 50 or 60 points to get ahead on a guy, and that comment comes up, and then suddenly all those points that you've pre-invested along with other teams is gone. It's less of an issue, I think, though, if you're recruiting a troubled kid that isn't getting a lot of attention or hasn't gotten a lot of attention to the point where they have interest levels on them, and you throw 5 or 6 contacts on them, or just enough to get them to low, even. Because at that point, you're not really spending more than 5 or 6 days worth of 2 point contacts to get a chance at a guy that's probably a little bit better than what you would otherwise be able to find if they didn't have that comment. I don't have much of an issue recruiting a guy with academics, though. It's no fun that I don't have control of them, I think. But I can always still just redshirt them as a junior and then get those 2 solid seasons in if I feel like they don't have enough talent immediately to help me. And if they do have enough talent to help me immediately, then I still get their upperclassmen years. So I would say whether you get that comment on academics early or late, it's still at least not the complete kiss of death that the troubled kids is.
Yeah, the academics one wish would populate, say, in their freshman, sophomore year, because that's usually when you tend to see it, especially in IRL. I had that issue not too long ago with one of the Cal State's current recruits or players, and Fred Horn, and invested on him since his freshman year, populated his senior year, of course, the academic comment. And that was a pain, or that was an internal killer for me because, of course, he's supposed to be my next up and coming shooting guard, and having no backup plan because, of course, all the other California teams hopped on the next best thing. So I wish or hope Steve takes some of like the advice I know that it's been posted in Discord, and I believe in the forum so far of maybe populating that a little bit earlier because it's pretty hard to go 3 years in high school and then all of a sudden your last year you're not academically qualified. So it at least gives users the chance to find a plan B or C if needed.
Yeah, I think it would be different if maybe 1 or 2 guys near the end of their college career kind of got caught up in something and their academics slipped. I think we could certainly see that from time to time and not have a big issue, but I think that I'm kind of in agreement that you would know on a lot of the cases when a player is kind of on the cusp of not being good enough academically in high school or in college, both really. You would be able to tell for like 90% of the players that you're looking at whether or not they're kind of fringed to their academic eligibility or not. What I don't really want to see is it kind of instituted at college level, because I think there are situations where you become academically ineligible as you're playing. Uh, I think that would be too fun to deal with as a uh, player of the hardwood online college basketball game, but it would be more realistic. And maybe it's something where we get like an IQ rating even, rather than just kind of blindly getting the comment thrown at us. Maybe if, as a high school freshman, we have a couple of GPAs out there, and one of the GPAs on one player is at like a 2.9 as a freshman, and for the other one, it's like a 3.5, and we can kind of say, oh, well, that 2.9, maybe he slips a little bit and isn't good enough academically, but we feel more confident about the 3.5 guy. If something like that came into play, I think that would also give people a little bit of information to play with and understand where that player's at in terms of their academics.
I definitely like that idea because I know a lot of people have thrown around the whole, what is it? Either players being ineligible or, some quirky thing that just makes them unable to play, a couple games or out for the season type of deal. I know others have thrown in, what was it, the transfer portal, which I think would kind of kill the game in a sense because you spend all that time recruiting somebody, they come in, they don't get a play because you redshirt them, and all of a sudden they leave the following year. So hopefully Steve sees some of the recommendations, especially like you just said, GPA wise, that would definitely help with scouting, kind of eliminate those risk factors that are somehow populate their senior year and kind of kill, especially some teams' vibe when they built a whole class surrounding that one player and now they're not even eligible.
Yeah, I'm certain that he's looking at almost every suggestion that gets thrown his way. It's just about whether or not something's feasible or whether or not he sees it in the same light as everybody else, or at least the people proposing it. Can't speak for everybody in any of those situations, but uh, we'll see what happens. Is there's always seeming to be some updates to uh, the game engine and some of the ability to make specific decisions. And I know there's always teams coming into the World Classic. It seems like every season we get another nation involved with a couple extra recruits coming out of those nations. So uh, we'll see what happens over the next couple of years and see what kind of advancements he makes as far as the game engine goes and the ability to recruit goes.
What would your advice be for specifically new players when picking up or selecting a team to begin with? Because I noticed, what was it, in the forum, someone selected a team was way too high. I believe it was LL3, and then they dropped themselves to LL6. Are you looking for a personal attachment to the school? Are you looking for who's got the most open scholarships? Um, who actually has talent? What do you think I know it's going to be different for every player, but what would be something you would look for?
When I look for like whatever team I happen to pick up randomly, the first thing I do is I go to Division 3, I press TPI, and then I press the top of the TPI, and I look. I try and find like the worst team, the most forgotten about team in existence, basically. Because I like to have like that good feel good turnaround story, so I try and find a team that has basically no hope of being competitive right now, and how long does it take me to get them turned around? To me, that's what makes the game fun, is taking a team that just doesn't get any love or support and giving them that chance to have a good manager, a good owner behind them for X amount of years, and have them kind of be that feel good story that comes from the very bottom and goes all the way to, say, conference 3 point something or other. That's about the height of where I feel like I can take them in the single first recruiting class. I think by the time they get to seniors, I'm at best in like the level 4 area and basically pushing for a playoff berth at that level.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering, how Nobody Jones chose his new team after he let go of Butler. He ended up picking up a UPR team, so Puerto Rican team,
Yeah,
and it's basically a monopoly there at one point because Jennifer Lopez, or the username Jennifer Lopez, just had first dibs on everybody. But looking at the way Nobody Jones was recruiting, he selected a couple Puerto Ricans, but he was definitely bargain bin hunting in other regions, and it's worked out really well for him.
let's take a look. It looks like he's kind of all over the place with this recruiting board. So he's got looks like two from his region, and then No, three. He's got three from his region, but two of them, oh no, all three of them, in fact, are walk-ons. So he hasn't recruited anybody from local. He's just gotten a couple via the walk-on situation now. I wonder if he's just looking for kind of the recruiting challenge of not having a good amount of prospects that he can recruit from regionally, and just seeing how well he can do when he has to compete with people for literally every single player, knowing that his contacts aren't as valuable.
I think
Because
even despite like the that handicap he's given himself, I believe he's LL4 now. Could be wrong.
I know he was basically on the cusp of a Final Four in Division Two last year. And he was doing it with basically a deficit of 10 uh, team power index over everybody else, which I thought was crazy. I think the average for like the top eight was like a 150, and I want to say he wasn't even in the 140s. Yeah, he was at a 137.2 for his team power index as far as last year goes, and he was able to make the deep run, or I guess it was this one right here. Yeah, 139.1, still below 140. But he got those three wins to get through the 64, the 32, and the 16 matchup. And I remember he got knocked off by a team that was also pretty solid. Yeah, Missouri Western. But even in that matchup, I think, yeah, he was about a 5 weighted skill index and almost a 10 team power index dog to Missouri Western. And he still coached his way to have a respectable finish. The first half was way better than the second half. So I'm just wondering if it's. I guess my guess for him would be that he's looking to try and make it as difficult as possible for himself to be able to compete, to give himself more of a challenge. Probably because he found it too easy to just steamroll us all back in the day. So wasn't he like finishing first all the time on Butler?
Something like that.
Basically, first, 3 years in a row. Got a tournament championship in there. Had a couple of early exits after that, but I guess round of 16 still not too bad. That would be my guess, is he's just trying to make it to where he feels like he's being pushed to his limits.
I think even some users can go look at how he's constructed his team because, like I said, he's bargain bin hunting and looking at some of these guys. You can see where he's searching for certain intangibles, some of his big men, his guards, in order to make these runs and basically be able to fight against higher TPI teams.
Yeah, what I find really intriguing is he's basically redshirting nobody. Zero. Because I think that's probably what's making the difference as far as his team power index versus everybody else's, is he's not redshirting and everybody else is redshirting a handful of their players. I'm wondering if he had a little bit of a fallout as far as some of his players graduating last year. Let's see. His starting five this year appears to be Harley, Bradford, Ulrich, Wagner, and Dolph so far. I see two of them, three of them. Ulrich, Dolph, and Wagner, right?
Yeah, he lost his two big men to graduation.
Yeah, because Bradford is now playing a handful more minutes than he was the year before, so it looks like there's even a bit of a rotation going on because we see a lot of 28s and 20s in there, so he was even rotating back then. But the one thing I
Yeah,
would, the one column I'm looking at, I don't know what you see, but when I look at it, I'm looking right here on speed. And basically, he's got maybe 3 players, looks like, that are below a 13 speed for his entire team. So even his bigs are at 13 and 15, and his small forwards are all at like 14, 16, 17, with his guards at 18. Just tons of team speed. Looks like that's his one recipe for success right now. Not sure if that's what he used last year to just play better than everybody else, or if it's some other area that he's also looking at, or if it's just a mixture of players. Again, I don't know exactly the talent of his bigs the year before.
yeah, I believe I know multiple teams run the a lot of speed, but wasn't Azusa Pacific during their national title run just ridiculous amount of speed, even though they were undersized?
Yeah, if I recall, he had like a really high skill level for all of his players, and they were all pretty quick guys and were less concerned about height just as long as they had that one attribute that pushed past everybody. And I do believe speed was that one. But I've seen teams also do it a different way where they've got just huge values on strength on bigs, for example, and they don't have speed, and yet they go all the way and win a championship or get to the championship finals in the tournament. So I don't know that it's like the only way to get there, but it certainly seems like that is nobody Jones' way of getting there.
Yeah, I kind of realized like how important speed is for a guard. I have Riley Hall on Cal State Dominguez Hills, only has 9 speed, and it also hurts that he's only 5'8", 185 pounds. So when I play against either bigger guards or faster guards, it they just have a field day with him. I thought, I could try out a little experiment, and I think it kind of shows speed definitely helps, as well as the wingspan, of course.
And just looking at the team before that, just to see if they were also speed centric here. They had decent speed across the board. In some cases, they matched. In some cases, they didn't. It looks like New York the year before had a slightly smaller clip, but he had guys that had other attributes that were really pushing high numbers. So he won his way through that with like 180s at specific attributes, whether it be shooting, whether it be handling. Let's see, Azusa won it in 2017, so we'll have to go back a handful of years to kind of look at that team. And if they went into the pros, then it makes it a little bit more problematic. The point guard was just ridiculous everywhere. Passing, handling, both double 17s. Even with that IQ, didn't tend to matter much. Big speed on their big here, so that's again falls in line with what we were talking about. Another guard with huge speed. Looks like this is kind of the most interesting player I think of the bunch. Holman was their starter that year. I'm not sure. It feels like he basically had to play him as a big, even though his height wasn't there.
I think that that was one of the biggest talking points because I think Holman was 6'6", I believe.
Yeah, 6'6.5", I think was his height start to finish there.
Didn't have ridiculous, anything that pops out, inside shot, outside shot, but that shooting range, ridiculous speed, and then his ability to finish at the rim.
Yeah, his shooting for power forward or small forward, whichever he ended up playing. In fact, I could probably uh, look at his development graph. That'll tell me where he played specifically. His blue line for power forward was there pretty much at the very top of that range the entire time, with center and a little bit of that era had small forward, but it looks like he kind of fell to the small SF by the end of it. So he played him as a big. But definitely, to me, the fact that there's huge rebounding and huge interior defense is probably what made him such a useful component, because you look at kind of an inside shooter and you say, okay, an inside shooter for me should be about at a 54, 55, 56% clip in the worst of scenarios. And Holman's field goal percentage was not nearly that good. It was down closer to 51 or 52% for the majority of his career if you just eliminate that freshman year where he's clearly not quite ready. But he was always a plus player, even though he had that field goal percentage in the lower end of the 50s than you would normally want, because he had the 48.9 opponent field goal percentage as a sophomore, the 48.1 as a junior, and the 40 sub 46 as a senior. So it looks like his goal with this player was just get big reboundings, which he did with 2 seasons where he was pushing double digits there, and one where he was really close to double digits as a senior.
Yeah, he
And
didn't have a ridiculous vertical wingspan kind of there. Definitely underweight, but still held his own. You can see his opponent's field goal percentage did not stand out. Just phenomenal for a big man.
yeah, I don't know that I could have been comfortable playing him as a center, but props to Basoy for playing him as a center because it clearly worked. I mean, this guy wasn't the stud of his team, but he was clearly uh, holding his own out there, as you said, with his field goal percentage difference between what he was shooting versus what his opponents were shooting. And I know my tooltip can't really hover it the same way for everybody to see on the podcast, but it looked like his opponents were shooting, they basically shot 400 times over the course of the 50 games, whereas he was shooting 370 times over that span. So they were getting more shots in at a lower clip than 7 or 8 shots a game. They were getting it more like 10 shots a game and shooting at that clip. So that makes it even more impressive to me that they were shooting so often, even more than he's shooting, and not doing nearly as well. What I would say though is that shooting range probably wasn't as useful to him. I mean, we're looking at the 3 pointers, and as you can probably tell, his 3 pointers never really got north of 1 after he became a big. In the freshman year, if we looked at that graph from before, in 2013, his small forward rating was still almost at a peak value, so he definitely got some playing time there and got more opportunities in his freshman year shooting from 3 point range. But I think even if you put him at a big, bigger O for outside as a center, he probably still can barely ever shoot from 3. I think that just moves him from right next to the basket to about 10 foot back. Unfortunately, it doesn't really show on this page the distance from the basket. I wish it kind of did. But back to our original talking point, it does look like the team speed was there start to finish. I don't think we saw anybody that was below a 13 or a 14. It looks like everybody was 15 on up for the most part.
Yeah, so just looking at all the different makeups of the teams that we've seen so far, you can definitely build a team. It doesn't even have to be like the fastest, as long as you have some either defense there, offense, of course. You can build a full speed team like Basoy did. Potentially, contend for a D3, D2 type of championship. So, I mean, there's no real cookie cutter way to just build a team. I think it's just find what you're comfortable with, see what you like and see what you don't like.
Yeah, I think guards is at the very top of the list right now. his team speed's pretty good too. I mean, it seems like a running theme amongst the top teams, but after speed, you start to see different things that they prioritize. Like we saw a lot of value in inside defense and rebounding on being more important even than uh, necessarily like height or inside shooting or some sort of offensive firepower. And while he's got Angel Reyes that has the 17 rebounding and 13 inside shot, he doesn't necessarily have the same powerhouses there yet. He's listed currently as the top team rankings wise, so he's beaten enough good teams to put himself there.
I don't know if it's just because it's non-con and early in the season doesn't want to give away too much, but Angel Reyes only averaging 22 and a half minutes this early, showing he's got probably a really deep bench right now.
Yeah, I think the player that's easily recognizable is the one that we keep having polls on the Discord is to kind of troll him, I guess.
We're talking about the bust.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. We can definitely talk about the bus since he's not on the podcast with us. He's over there slacking somewhere. But man, this player, in theory, could just carry you, and he so far is doing a pretty good job of carrying him this year with the 50 from the field as a small forward. And once you kind of push a guy out to the guard height, you're not really expecting them to put much more than a high 40s number out there. And his current split is a 50 versus a 35.1. I know we're not into conference play yet, but even if he's like a 10 split there, he's going to be a huge, huge, huge part of what uh, Dominican University of California can put together this year.
Yeah, that is SI growth. And what are we looking at? Probably by the start of his junior year, he's probably going to be close to that 200 SI. And we all know, or we're all pretty sure, Dominican's going to stay in the Legends bracket at least until next year. And he's primed for, that hopefully breakout season to where he becomes that star-studded focal point of the offense. Even currently, he's averaging 16.2 points. Like you said, only a 35 percent for his opponent's field goal percentage. Got
Edge,
what? A +3 SI on the season so far.
yep. Really,
And we've all.
I think
Oh,
we're only
sorry.
like 3 development updates in, aren't we? I think we had 2 over the first weekend and this last weekend, plus the Thursday one from last week. So I think we're only 3 developments in. So we're not expecting like a huge 7 or 8 SI growth between those 3 updates. So 3 is a pretty reasonable number. It means he's pretty much on pace for 18 to 20.
And looking at the way Dominican plans out, they're pretty good at somehow utilizing the small forward. I have yet to figure it out on how he knows how to pick apart mismatches and get the small forward to absolutely light up the other small forward. I tried various ways, haven't figured it out, but I'm pretty sure once Hoffmeister gets up there and some of his guys start to leave, we might start seeing Hoffmeister in that 20 plus points a game category.
Yeah, complete player for sure. I mean, it looks like I would say by the midpoint of this year, there's not going to be a single rating on this entire bar that's single digits. He's got 2 9s right now in stamina and inside defense. I'd be willing to bet that those 2 are gone by, say, like development update, 4 or 5 development updates from now. I bet they'll both be gone. And that's just a sophomore without a red shirt. Clearly, you don't redshirt this kind of player, given he's already at 170, and because you'll never be able to recruit anybody ever again until he's in the pros. So, yeah, just a ridiculous player. Probably going to be the reason why he stays up at the top of the rankings for some time.
I wonder if he's gonna struggle next year. Looking at he has two graduating, and then he has five open scholarships. So I'm not sure if he's gonna redshirt any of those guys because looking at his board a little bit, they don't seem, of course, legends ready at this point. So I wonder if he's gonna have to go with a lot shorter rotation the following season, and that's where he may run into some trouble.
Yeah, well, he's going to have Hoff. He's going to have Gillespie. He's going to have at least one of his bigs still remains with Fontana, and then Fong as well will be kind of 150 range. So I guess it would depend on what his competition looks like there. Uh, I think just looking at TPI again, let's go to the entire rankings for Division 1. And let's see, he is middle of the pack right now there, but the bottom of the pack is basically, if you're looking to be fringe to stay up, it looks like it's at 144 to 145. And I think with those three or four players I just listed, he'll be close to a 150 on those four alone, to a 151, 152 range. If he can just get one more starter that's close to that number, I think he probably is going to be good enough to stay up next year, despite losing a couple of key components from this year's team and graduation and or to the pros. I think that looking at this TPI again, it is a little bit deceptive occasionally, but I can't help but always point out when we look at something like this that you're looking at a bunch of teams in the 150s and 140s as far as being competitive in Division 1. But if you go back down and click on Division 3 instead and look at just the top teams there, the amount of 140s you have in Division 3, pretty small there. It looks like we have 6 through the first 3 updates. So just because we're looking at these high speed players for these top teams, these national championship winning caliber teams, doesn't mean that you as a newer owner or an owner kind of rebuilding their team have to look at that huge skill level as something that you have to recruit right off the bat. So as we look to kind of wrap this one up, I guess I'll ask if there are any kind of final words of wisdom you would provide some of the people out there looking at their team and trying to find ways to pull it up into kind of the Division 1 basketball level.
I think if you're starting from LL6 or LL5, I definitely look for kind of like the traditional basketball guys that you would normally run on the court. Uh, of course, your point guard, someone who's relatively smart, you know, fast, can definitely pass the ball. And then I've noticed I got away with it, but two big men who can really dominate the inside. If all you're looking is to get out of LO6, in my opinion, just find some scoring threats, get them up there, get you out of there, so that way you can start getting the what is it, the recruiting bonus from promoting. So you can start being able to battle for those higher tier guys that you absolutely want that'll help carry you throughout Division 1. I think that's the method I use. Haven't been able to implement that into Colorado. Like I said, still have the recruiting penalty, so not sure when that's going to go away, but hopefully after this season.
It looks
How
like
about yourself?
it looks like it should be about gone now. You may have the feeling that it still exists, but I think in large part now that you've actually had everybody that's a 4 or 5 star graduate, it should finally have fallen away this year. Should be the first one you don't feel this bad. I think I've given quite a bit of advice as far as kind of what I look for in some of the previous podcasts. So I'd like to take a second to point out coaches. Uh, the coach that I got for Ashland, I'll kind of put it up on screen right now, but he started with literally he might be a good motivator and he might be a good teacher. And that's the only comments they started with. If you take a guy like that that's real young and doesn't have a comment yet, you can kind of luck your way into some good coaches. So don't feel like you have to go out there and get a veteran necessarily to be able to have a coach that's capable of bringing you up from the lower leagues or developing your players. You can go take some chances, especially on your assistant coaches, on guys without comments, and just see what develops from them. Not every player is going to get 5 positive comments like this guy just happened to get for me. Uh, but if you have 4 guys or 3 of them as your assistant coaches that are all young, that don't have any comments yet or just kind of new in to the game, give them a shot because maybe you do find a guy that has a whole bunch of non-tactical column, the player development motivation and recruiting column comments that grow in and say, hey, this guy's really going to be good for you at developing and recruiting and motivating a player. And if it doesn't work out, you just release them in the following offseason and you try again because the assistant coaches don't have nearly the value as your main coach. So don't be afraid to take some chances there early on in your playing career as a owner of one of these teams because it's going to be kind of a difficult ask to get a guy that's really, really good at coaching in every attribute, even in the off season when some of the bot teams go in full on release mode on him. Other than that, just again, make sure you look at what TPI you need to be at the top of your current conference and not what you need to be at the top of the very top division because you don't play there, you play at whatever conference you're in. So don't feel like you need to push your team too far too fast. Just get guys that you can get into that level and be competitive. Yeah, Holocron, thanks for joining me this week. Good to have someone to talk to in one of these.
Oh, I know how that feels, but glad to be on.
Yeah, it's good to kind of have somebody that has a different set of opinions too, so that people don't feel like there's one way to pencil them in and they have to play this way or they won't be good. There's clearly multiple ways as you're currently in. I think you're in the second league basically with your top team now, so you're 2 above where I'm at on my top team. Because I think mine's kind of in the lull before it gets real good again.
Yeah, and like we've told many Discord users, if you ever have a question, stuff like that, either post it in the advice, ask. DMs are always open, so try to help you out. May not be able to link players as much anymore, especially because it's still early in the season. Maybe later in the season, but can try to guide you on like what to specifically look for and try to help you. So that way you can use that knowledge beforehand instead of just being handed down a player every time.
Yeah, I mean, if it's your first year, I think there's a little bit of a window for us to kind of point at specific guys, but I feel like there's a window of a couple of seasons there where you, after a certain point, you kind of take the, you don't kind of hold the bike by the handle for the kid that you're trying to teach how to ride a bike. You just leave the training wheels on, let them get a feel for it there, and then you take the training wheels off after that and kind of let them ride and kind of learn trial and error from that point forward. And that's kind of the way I view teaching anybody kind of new to the game is will really help you hands on right off the start, especially if you post in help on the forums or if you ask for advice on the Discord, whichever medium you choose, I'll probably be there trying to help you out regardless. Uh, but yeah, I think when it comes to exact scouting, if you get a player from anybody, it's usually not going to be their primary player anyways anymore. It's going to be like their third or fourth best player left on the board. So just know that you kind of have to do your own homework regardless to be able to get the premier player for your recruiting class for your region. Yep, I'm Fury, and that was Holocron, and that was Total Podcast Idiots podcast, and we'll see if we come back next week with another big podcast, or if we get you one in a couple weeks' time, maybe we'll have Holocron again. Maybe we'll find somebody else. But see y'all later.